Today on CityCast Denver, are people really leaving Denver in droves? According to new data from a major moving company, it seems so. But our state demographer, Kate Watkins, says the story of our changing population is actually pretty complicated. I sit down with Kate to understand what the economy, housing, aging, international migration, and dwindling birth rates say about Colorado now and in the future. Oh, and hey, CityCast Denver is hiring for an audience development manager. If you've got a knack for social media and marketing, hit us up. Find a link in the show notes for a full job description and more information. Today is Tuesday, January 20th. I'm Bree Davies, and here's what Denver's talking about. Kate Watkins, welcome to CityCast Denver.
Thanks so much for having me.
So we have some fun stuff to talk about. I actually want to talk about this article that we came across last week with this headline saying that Colorado is at risk of becoming, quote, the New Jersey of the West, because apparently we're in the top 5 states for outbound moves, meaning people are leaving. But that data came from a moving company. Is this moving company right? Are we really one of the top 5 states losing population?
The data might be right for that specific moving company, but other data that we have suggests kind of a different story where Colorado continues to grow and we continue to, on net, have positive migration. So in other words, positive net migration. In other words, more people coming in than going out.
Really? Okay. I mean, that's why we was like kind of grain of salt with this story, because it's like, it's a moving company. This is who they're serving. But I guess, could we get a little bit more into that data? Like, has it slowed from previous years? What does the migration look like for Colorado, I don't know, say in the last 2 years?
Sure. So looking backward, and I'll back up a little bit and say that the data that we have in terms of estimates, so kind of that historical looking backwards, go through 2024. We don't yet have more complete information for 2025. We will get a new data point that the Census Bureau releases at the end of this month, at the end of January, rather. And that'll provide a little more complete information, at least on net migration. So kind of the latest and greatest that I'll talk about through, at least today, would be through 2024. Anything beyond that would be a forecast. 2025 and beyond.
Do you have a forecast?
We do. We do have a forecast for 2025, and we're projecting a slowdown in 2025. And that's on a couple of different factors, though, namely the immigration policy that we have. So kind of muting that international migration to the state, and sort of a slowdown in jobs activity and in jobs growth, which in jobs tend to be a kind of a big driver of net migration to Colorado. And so the combination of those two factors expected to really mute net migration in 2025 and likely 2026 as well.
Okay, so this forecast is sort of looking at the data that you're waiting to see for the last year, but also what could be happening in the near future.
Correct. And to get back to your initial question about kind of what's happened over the course of the last, say, 2 years, we've actually seen an acceleration in net migration to Colorado, though largely on growth in our international migrant population. And this is something that we saw across the U.S., where there were elevated border crossings into the U.S. between 2022 and 2024 and peaking in 2024. And Colorado received some of those migrants.
What is that part of this? Can we get a little bit more into what that part of the story says about Colorado's population?
Right. So during that kind of 2022 to 2024 period, we did see elevated growth in particular from that international component and international net migration component. During that same time, we saw relatively weak domestic net migration to Colorado, which was sort of bucking the trend that we've seen. So historically, kind of looking back, say, to the 1990s, international migration has made up about 20% of net migration, and domestic, the remainder of that, 80%. And since 2022, we saw that those relative shares reverse, where it was 80% international, 20% domestic. So kind of relatively weak domestic net migration, quite strong international migration, and certainly on net, fairly strong or just kind of even in line with historical trends, net migration to the state, but primarily on that international component. So interesting trends and trends that we don't expect moving into the future, again, because of immigration policy for the U.S. writ large.
So something I think about a lot is the narrative around growth. So I grew up here. I've been here my whole life. How long have you been in Colorado?
Since the age of 3 months old, grew up in Loveland, Colorado. So been here a long time. Spent a little time in California, a little time in New York, but for the most part, spent my whole life in Colorado.
Okay, so you may be familiar with this narrative. Like, I think over the last 10 or 15 years, it's been this narrative about people are just moving here in droves, and there's this rapid growth that's changing so much about us. This is something that folks literally walk up and want to talk to me about. And I wonder, how accurate is that narrative? I don't know, in 2025, are we still, like you said, people are still coming here, but that feeling that people have, does that really match the realities of our population?
We have seen, Colorado's seen a couple of periods of really strong net migration. And the 90s in particular, really, really strong. A lot of baby boomers moving into the state. And then the mid 2010s. So kind of 2015 is when we saw a peak, but kind of 2010s is when we saw a lot of millennials coming into the state. So we have seen these waves of net migration, certainly. Some of that has historically been tied to sort of the business cycle, some of it the demographics of particularly large age cohorts or generational cohorts. So the baby boomers and then the millennials, kind of your bigger cohorts or generations. So those waves are real, and whether you want to call it droves or something else, it certainly elevated net migration. So more ins than outs during those time periods, and that's boosted population growth in some cases a fairly big way.
So there is some, not that there isn't truth to that, but there is some actual numbers behind the feeling that I think a lot of people are conveying about change.
Absolutely. And sometimes we feel that change through the composition of people. And so in the 2010s in particular, we had a lot of kind of Midwesterners moving into the state. And so some kind of shifting in some of the culture of Colorado that comes with new people coming into the state.
Obviously, some folks are still leaving. Are we seeing a particular population or demographic that's maybe, those outbound moves? Is that one particular part of our population that's leaving?
Sure. And I think it depends on the geography that we're talking about. So I'll speak to Colorado first and then shift over to city and county of Denver. When it comes to Colorado, what we've been seeing historically is that Colorado's been really good at bringing in 20 and 30-somethings into the state. Where we're losing populations on net is seeing a little bit of net out migration or more outs than ins of our 65-plus-year-old population. Not a huge change there where we've got more outs than ins, but there have been more outs than ins. So maybe your retiree population moving closer to family or to a warmer climate, for example, could explain some of those trends. When it comes to city and county of Denver, what we've seen historically over the past several decades has been net out migration of families and net out migration of basically kind of your even 40-plus-year-old population, generally speaking, or at least kind of this trend of lots of 20 and 30-somethings moving into the city, and then maybe they decide they want to start a family elsewhere or decide they want kind of a different lifestyle. They move elsewhere, usually around the Denver metro area, just not staying within the city and county of Denver, and then kind of age in place from there for a little while. And then sometimes we see them move elsewhere, even say further out from the Denver metro area, or just kind of picking a different county once their kids have, say, flown the nest, or once they reach retirement age. So we see these sort of predictable patterns of migration within the state, kind of out of the Denver metro area, Denver city and county of Denver, and into other areas.
That's interesting because I'm in my mid 40s, and I know in the last 10 years I've seen a lot of folks leave the state because maybe they moved here in their 20s and 30s. They've decided they wanted to have kids. Their family or their sort of extended network doesn't live here. So they end up picking up and going back, to where they might have more support to have a family. And what's interesting to me too is that data, I think, also is looking at school enrollment, for instance. Like in DPS, Chalkbeat reported that enrollment in DPS dropped in 2025, in part due to those students, the newcomers and immigrants that came, then eventually left in the last couple of years. But also they attributed it to gentrification and falling birth rates. I wonder, what does our state look like when it comes to kids? Are we a state that sees more families? Are we a state that sees less families? Like, what does the population look like when we look at like that really young population?
So I think zooming out, important to think about births and kind of our young child population in the context of what's been going on with fertility rates globally. So we've seen fertility rates truly fall across the globe and in a fairly dramatic way, and certainly happened. This has impacted the U.S. And in Colorado as well. So to kind of put that into perspective, most countries across the globe are now below the replacement rate of 2.1 births per woman. And what that means is over the course of multiple generations, you would see population declines in those countries, if not for international migration. So that's most of your countries, that's the U.S. and that's Colorado. So total fertility rate is the replacement rate, 2.1 births per woman. The U.S. is right now at about 1.6 births per woman, and Colorado at about 1.47 births per woman. Denver's even lower at 1.2.
This episode is brought to you by Cozy Earth. What can I say? I love everything that Cozy Earth makes. From their viscose from bamboo sheets to their super soft pajama sets, and of course, the famous bubble cuddle blanket that my family fights over, these folks know their fabrics. And then Cozy Earth goes and tops it all again with their Luxe bath towels. Listen, these go beyond hotel towels, beyond spa towels. These towels are so soft, my 4-year-old was convinced they were actually blankets. Like, he asked me, Mom, is this a blanket or a towel? And I was like, no, it's a towel. He was all matter of fact about it. He's like, Mom, these towels are so cozy, we can't puke on these ones. And I was like, okay. It's because these towels are crafted with a unique blend of cotton and viscose from bamboo using innovative zero-twist technology. Head to CozyEarth.com and use my code CozyDenver for up to 20% off. And if you get a post-purchase survey, be sure to mention you heard about Cozy Earth right here on CityCast Denver. Give the gift of comfort that lasts beyond the holidays and carries into the cozy new year. Did you know CityCast Denver has a perks program? Every week, we're highlighting some standout deals from our favorite businesses in town to help you support local and save some money. It's a win-win. Here are some highlights from this week. Check out Meow Wolf's Adultiverse Space Rodeo on January 17th and experience the worlds of Meow Wolf Denver transformed into a 21 and up psychedelic party. Saddle up for an intergalactic adventure. Just use code GIDDYUP for $4.20 off an Adultiverse ticket. Offer available for redemption now through January 17th. Or what about Topo Designs? Just visit a Topo Designs retail store and mention this ad to receive 20% off your purchase. Some exclusions apply. Valid until February 1st. Looking for some fun? Check out Green Door and pre-order a curated cannabis box for your Denver trip. Includes edibles, snacks, and local accessories, ready for pickup near your stay. No stress, no lines, just a better trip. Use code DenverPerk for $10 off any experience box. To see a full list of participating businesses, just visit denver.citycast.fm/perks. It's a great way to check out new restaurants, shops, and events in the Mile High City without breaking your budget. And I love that for you. Obviously, when we talk about birth rates and talk about populations, we're also talking about things like tax base in a state or the economy comes into play here. How does how does the population, I guess, what do we look like right now when it comes to the economy? What are the factors maybe that are either impacting the economy or that the economy is impacting when it comes to our current population trends?
Sure. So we do notice a really important interplay between people and jobs, and so I'll start there and then talk about some kind of broader factors when we think about population growth and the economy. So this interplay between people and jobs, of course, jobs are people, and so there is this natural tie there. And as I mentioned, net migration in Colorado historically has been very much tied to the business cycle. So jobs growth, if we see declines in job opportunities really kind of falling off, then we tend to see really weak net migration or out migration on net from Colorado. And so that element certainly important. And also people can create economic activity. So when we're thinking about the economy, people create the demand for goods and services. Certainly people are also providing those goods and services. And so in many different ways, people truly matter when it comes to economic growth. So moving forward, if thinking about kind of the future of Colorado, and these are trends that we're again seeing across the nation, across the globe, we are projecting slower population growth. And again, that ties right back to fertility rates. So fewer births ultimately translate to slower population growth and even population decline over the long run. So thinking about slower population growth, that can mean slower jobs growth, slower consumer activity growth over time, as we have just kind of fewer and fewer young people to replace those who are older. So those are some of the dynamics. We're not projecting a population decline in Colorado during our forecast period, which extends through 2060, nor are kind of your national population forecasters expecting a population decline in the near future as well. So again, going out through 2060, no population declines really expected, but slowing population growth and potentially even sort of reaching zero by the end of that time period for the nation. For Colorado, we're projecting to reach near 0.1% for Denver through the end of that forecast horizon, and 0.4% for Colorado as a whole.
So for context, is that quite a jump from, say, 15 or 20 years ago? Is that on track? Like, I'm trying to picture what that number means for like the experience maybe we're having right now in the state.
Sure. So we saw to put that into perspective, the average population growth in Colorado in the 2070s was 2.8%. We get to 1.4 in the 80s, 2.7 in the 2.5 in the 90s, 1.7 in the early 2000s, and then kind of slowing from there, 1.4 in the 2010 to 2020 decade. So moving forward, right now we're at, or at least in 2024, 1% growth in Colorado, also 1% growth in Denver. So expecting to really slow from there to be 1% or below for the foreseeable future, all the way through 2060.
What about the impacts of population changes when it comes to something like our housing market? I just know this is a big topic right now. The housing market is cooling. Fewer folks are buying houses. The prices right now don't seem to be going down. But how does our population impact what our housing market looks like? Or like, I mean, I guess right now, what does that mean for Colorado right now?
In thinking about housing, lately we've been talking a lot about it within our office about sort of this trifecta of the interplay between people, jobs, and housing, where you kind of need each one in order to support the other, where you sort of need at least relatively high paying jobs in order to afford some housing. In some cases, you need people to fill those jobs. You need a house to put a person in. So there's, inherent interplays across the board. We are kind of coming off of a period where we've seen peak growth in new household formation, or at least peak growth in the age cohorts that tend to form new households. So roughly you're kind of 25 to, say, 44-year-olds. These are individuals who are kind of moving out of their parents' basement or moving out of the roommate situation and looking to strike it out on their own or kind of, start a family in their own home, for example. So that tends to put upward pressure on demand for housing. So the millennial generation, again, kind of a big cohort of folks, have moved squarely into that age cohort, and we continue to see some growth. But future-looking growth, we'll see some easing in sort of that age cohort in particular, and that may ease some of the demand for housing in Colorado and across the nation. But at the same time, we tend to age in place. In particular, when we reach retirement age, we move into a home. We tend to like to stay there, and this is a trend that not only exists in Colorado but across the nation. And so, with that aging in place, and say roughly 94% of those 65 plus remaining in their home in a given year, that means that we're not necessarily having a whole lot of churn in a increasing portion of our kind of population. So more and more of the population moving into retirement age, folks aging in place. That means housing availability might have some constraints, or the housing supply might have some constraints. So we have these demographic dynamics certainly interacting with the housing market, in particular putting kind of upward pressure on it. So you've got kind of growth in demand and at the same time some constraints on supply. That's been factoring in. I mentioned that we might start to see some easing when it comes to the demand side of things, but demographically speaking, yeah, maybe some turnover as folks kind of move out or move on as we age, but at the same time, we'll continue to see some pressures there on the housing market. And affordability is a big component here too, where again, you have to have those higher paying jobs in order to be able to afford relatively higher cost housing.
So Kate, talking about housing affordability is one piece of the conversation when it comes to housing and population. But I know for a long time there's been a concern that Colorado just has a shortage of units. Is that still true? Like, have you all looked at the impacts of maybe a lack of the types of housing we need compared to like what the population is?
Sure. In 2025, our office did produce an analysis that estimates the housing shortfall in the state. What we found was that as of 2023, which is the latest kind of point in time where we have data, we estimate a shortfall of 106,000 units in the state. The shortfall peaked based on our methodology in the year 2019 at 140,000 units. So we've seen, basically we've closed the gap to some degree, and a lot of that attributable to a lot more units coming onto the market and this kind of a slowing of population growth. So that supply and demand, those factors kind of coming into a better balance with supply, at least new supply, exceeding new demand. So close the gap to some degree, but at the same time, we've seen affordability challenges continue to increase. So the price points continuing to kind of hike up over time, at least relative to incomes.
So where does that leave us, I guess, now or in the future, or looking at the forecasting you're doing? Like, you said the gap is closed. Does that mean we're on a better track for a better housing market, I guess?
We have been recently, and just kind of thinking through population growth over the last 2 years since 2023, I think we've continued to close that gap to some degree. Looking over the longer run, we're projecting that we'd need about 34,000 additional units each year in order to just hold the gap where we are, hold the gap constant. We've basically kind of matched that rate of new development over the course of the last couple of years. Moving into the future, though, we're seeing kind of new permits for housing, new construction activity really fall off. And so unless we continue to really slow down when it comes to population growth, which to some degree we are, we'd certainly need that in order to keep the gap just where it is.
What about like affordability and population when it comes to Denver versus other parts of the state? I'm just thinking about, I've had friends recently in the last year or so buy houses in Pueblo and Trinidad, for instance, much lower prices than we're seeing in Denver. But also, those are just individual people. I wonder, are folks who are leaving Denver, is there a bump in people just moving to other more affordable parts of the state, or are folks really just leaving Colorado?
Absolutely. Most of the folks leaving Denver end up staying in the state. And if we look at those migration patterns, they have been going towards more affordable areas relative to Denver. So we're certainly seeing that pattern within Colorado. And that's the pattern that we've seen sort of historically too, where some of your kind of job centers tend to see once people reach a certain age, they tend to kind of move elsewhere, depending on kind of labor demand or just kind of lifestyle choice, the desire to maybe spread out a little bit more, or if you have access to different amenities that you might want at different ages, we tend to see that pattern. I think looking at commuting patterns also really interesting. Where take a place like Weld County, which again relatively more affordable, but we tend to see a lot of commuters into the Denver metro area, or at least people who are working. Their jobs are based, or their employers are based in Denver, and they're living, all around the state, but even as far north as Weld County. So those dynamics, you're still seeing some of that tied to the labor market, but people, willing to or able to move out elsewhere, moving into locations that have access to more affordable housing, but still doing the commute. And some of them might be remote workers, which makes it a little easier.
That's what I wanted to ask you about, because this is a conversation about Denver's downtown a lot, is that it's just not recovering in the same way that they were hoping, because versus, I don't know, say 20 or 30 years ago, after, like another economic bust, for lack of a better term, because of the lack of folks coming back into downtown. How does work from home, has that had an effect on our population, I guess, in general? Because that's a specific type of job. But I also imagine if you can work from home, you might want to live somewhere that's more affordable, and that place might not be Colorado.
Sure, absolutely. Work from home, again, because of that dynamic between jobs and people, work from home kind of changes the game a bit. And if you are able to live wherever you want and work remotely, people are going to live wherever they want. And that might be tied to things like affordability. But also, I think what we've seen, and certainly during the pandemic, when we saw kind of more of an explosion in remote work, people moved to Colorado to kind of capitalize on the great outdoor recreation, the amenities, the natural resources that we have here in the state. And so I think it definitely goes both ways.
Interesting. Yeah. I think about that so much. And like we just mentioned, folks move here for our outdoor amenities, but affordability eventually has to come into play there, where like maybe it's like, like you were saying, in the 2010s, it was a totally different story. Like, sure, move here for the mountains. You could still find a relatively affordable house in the city and do both of those things, but that's changed quite a bit. My last question is sort of just a bigger question for you. I mean, you have a very unique perspective. You look at this data all day long. Like you said, you're forecasting to 2060. I wonder, is there something surprising about our population changes that maybe we don't always think about as people that don't look at this data all day?
I think some things to really keep in mind are our aging dynamics. And again, tying it back to fertility rates. Colorado historically brought in lots and lots of 20 and 30-somethings, and we're going to have fewer 20 and 30-somethings moving into the future. And so what Colorado looks like over the long run will evolve into an older population, one where maybe we don't have as much when it comes to sort of the transient to move to downtown Denver and then ultimately kind of travel elsewhere in the state. We might have a bit weaker net migration moving forward because of that. Just again, fewer people to pull, a smaller and shrinking pool to pull from into the state. So competition with other states will become steeper over time as we have a smaller pool, and we will inevitably grow older with time. And so these dynamics, certainly will shape and shift what Colorado looks like moving forward.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I can't imagine. I guess, is there anything in the 2060 forecast that you're looking at that you're like, this is going to be wild, or this is weird, or this is something we've not seen in the last 100 years?
I think something that makes this forecast different and unique is that for the first time, we're projecting natural decline within our forecast horizon. So natural change are our births minus our deaths. And the other population growth component is net migration. So births historically have exceeded deaths. We're having more kids than we are dying. And that's resulted in a natural increase over time. We're now projecting that we'll have more deaths than births we're starting in the year 2047, and then, continue that natural decline moving into the future. When that happens, the only way to grow the population is through net migration to the state. So again, that net migration piece is really, really critical, really consequential for growth. We can compare that to national trends, where the latest Congressional Budget Office projections suggest that the U.S. will enter natural decline in 2030. So it's just around the corner.
Yeah, I was like, that's really not far. I mean, that's less than half a decade. So be interesting to see if Colorado will be advertising, please move here, after for so long the conversation has sort of been the other way. Well, Keith, this has been really fascinating. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
That's all for today here on CityCast Denver. If you enjoyed this show, why don't you take a minute to tell Shannon Gray at the Colorado Department of Local Affairs we said hey. Rate the show wherever you get your podcasts, and subscribe to our morning newsletter and learn more about us at denver.citycast.fm. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. See you later.